Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be doing the third installment of position rankings for the 2024 United Football League season. Now, I've done two other position rankings where I looked at the entire room of a position and evaluated exactly how good they project to be for the upcoming season and rank them based on their starter first and their backup second. So we've done the quarterbacks and the running backs, and now we're going to do the last single starter position on offense in tight ends. Now, what I mean by single starter is barring certain schemes being made, overall, you have one starting quarterback, one starting running back, and one starting tight end. So we're finishing the trifecta of single starters, not counting the O-line and center naturally. And so with that, we're going to be looking at tight ends. Now, you've all heard the story before. Tight ends used to be pretty much just run blockers, where very few of them were good at catching passes. And then, over the last couple decades, we've seen an evolution to where tight ends are now expected to be great receivers. And we've seen teams like the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL this past season win the Super Bowl with their number one receiver being a tight end. Then the two best teams the USFL had to offer this past season in the Breakers and Stallions both relied heavily on tight ends as their number one receiver. So tight end is a very important position, and unlike running back and quarterback, there really is only 3 elite tight ends currently on rosters in spring football. So it makes it a big deal to have one of those guys, and a pretty big deal to have good depth or a decent starter if you don't have them. So, naturally, before we get started, once again, the 500 subscriber Q&A is next Monday or Tuesday. So if you have any questions, ask them down below, whether it be about me, the UFL, other YouTubers, leave them down below. And without further ado, let's get started with number 8, the Arlington Renegades. The Renegades come in at number 8 because, well, there should be 4 elite spring football tight ends, but Sal Cannella is in that same boat of guys like DeAndre Johnson and Reggie Corbin, where it's that issue of, do they actually want to keep playing spring football because they weren't ever protected, drafted, or signed pending where they're coming from and whatnot. So they lost their number 1 tight end, and the rest of the roster currently is one guy's a spring football veteran in Jared Scott, but he was a complete footnote really with the Breakers. He only had 1 reception. He wasn't, the receiving threat of the team because they had Sage Surratt, who was one of the elite tight ends this past season. But the guy I project to be the starter is probably going to be Austin Allen. Austin Allen, back when he was in college, was a legit top-tier tight end. At least in the Big Ten, he was considered the best tight end back in 2021. Now, since then, he's been on a couple practice squads. So I think that he has probably the best shot to be the starter. But then you also have Seth Green, who is kind of that mix of a wide receiver and a tight end, much like Sage Surratt, as most of his career has been a tight end, but certain rosters have him as a wide receiver, some as a tight end. He's probably going to be moved to tight end, I would assume. We'll see. Overall, he's been in practice squads as well, but I'm putting Austin Allen as a starter. Essentially, this is the weakest group overall when you consider the fact that basically none of these guys have true experience in spring football. Because even when you look at Jared, his experience is a reception. Every other team has at least one guy that is a legit starter, and at worst, they have the guys that have played college ball decently. So, I'm putting the Renegades at 8. I don't think that should be a sort of shock to anyone. As long as they don't have Sal Cannella or get anyone in free agency, they're not really going to move up on this list at the moment. Easily number 8. Now, coming in at number 7 is going to be the St. Louis Battlehawks. Yeah, the Battlehawks once again fall a bit short on a list. This time it is in the tight end area. Now, the reason for this is that their starter is going to be Jake Sutherland, who was with the team this past season, but was not a dominant receiving threat. He only had 9 receptions, but 2 of those were for touchdowns. Not necessarily a bad starter, it's just that not as good as almost every other team above them. And then in terms of the backups, when you look at Kamari Averett or Kamor Campbell, or Gamble, my bad, it's a couple guys that have played in college. They haven't really done anything in the NFL naturally. Both of them had their moments. When you look at Averett, he did have a really solid 2021 season with Bethune-Cookman. But aside from that great season, he's just, his second season there wasn't as dominant. Still solid, but not nearly as dominant as 17 yards per reception and 10 TDs. And then Gamble's time at both Florida and UCF, it was, okay. He was playing at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, as, another really great tight end that's now in the Falcons. Sorry, I'm blanking on his name real quick. But the fact is that when you look at it, they're just a bit better than the Renegades, but they're not better than the teams above them. The teams above them all have at least one guy that is a legit starter, or guys that do have a decent amount of experience. So, because of that, I am putting them down here at 7. Number 6 is going to be the Roughnecks. I kind of think I should move them up to 5. I think they're very debatable at 5. The only issue is that their starter's Braden Bowman, who was the tight end of the Generals. And it's just hard for me to evaluate how dominant he really was at tight end, even though his stats are really high at 210 yards. It's one of the highest among the starters in the league. The only issue is that he was playing on a team that had lost their number one receiver in Kevontae Turpin, and their overall receiving game was pretty lackluster this past season. So it's essentially like, yes, he was the third leading receiver on his team, but that was just kind of how it fell down. It's not necessarily that he was dominant. He was still really solid. 122 yards after catch is great, but only 19 receptions, and as you've probably known if you've watched a lot of my videos, I like having reception type of tight ends, guys that get those 5-10 yards, not the 20-yarders. Now, the other guys, Clint Sieg is a fullback tight end kind of hybrid guy. He had his moments this past season. Then they have a couple other tight ends. Ryan Izzo was a former NFL player for the Patriots mainly. But this past season with the Stars, we expected a lot out of him. He really didn't do much. Then there are other guys, Woody Brandom, Radel Rahman. They were guys that, much like Izzo, really only had, a couple of moments to do things. Overall, it's a tough one. I think there is a very real argument that they should be above the team at 5 because I do think Bowman is probably a better starter than anyone number 5 has. But I think that overall, it's close. It's hard for me to look at him and say, coming into this new system where this Gamblers team or this Roughnecks team is inheriting the Gamblers team, where the Gamblers had insanely good receivers, I don't think he's going to be as dominant in this system personally. I think they're going to be using a lot more blocking tight ends and all that. So it might be a bold take to put him at 6 instead of 5, but I'm putting him at 6. The number 5 is going to be the DC Defenders. The Defenders' weakness compared to them is that their starter, Briley Moore, is, at least statistics-wise, not nearly as good. But it's the fact that I think that you have a guy that was here this past season, so he already is familiar with the system. And your backups are pretty similar. Alex Ellis, Ben Brashnahan, Sean Bayer. All three of them are guys who are pretty similar, but they all have their own niche in a sense. Alex Ellis is the guy that has played spring ball this past year. Bayer is a guy who has been in the NFL the past couple of years among practice squads and all that. And then Brashnahan is a guy that has very, a lot less overall experience compared to them in terms of the NFL sense. It's a good trio of different guys to have as your backup. And I think that it's hard to put a guy that doesn't have 200 receiving yards above a guy that does. But I think that when you factor in the fact that Bowman was on a team that really didn't have any great receivers, they had like Cam Echols-Looper, but they didn't really have anyone that was great after the loss of Turpin. You factor in the fact that they are a team that was a pretty big, play-action merchant type team, thanks to Darius Victor being a great running back. I think that overall, I actually think the DC Defenders are a better room. I think that Bowman isn't going to be as good a fit here in Houston as a guy like Briley Moore, who's already been here. It's a hot take. I fully understand if you have the Roughnecks above them, but I'm putting the Defenders at 5. Then when you get to number 4, we have Michigan. Michigan has, I would say, the best non-superstar tight end. When you look at Cole Hikutini, he's one of those guys that is always serviceable. 21 receptions, 239 yards, 5 TDs, really solid. He was top 25 in receiving yards. But he's not the best receiver on the Panthers, and there's tight ends better than him. He is a really solid tight end. He's the best starter that isn't one of the 3 legit all-star type players. Now your backups, Gunnar Oaks is a guy they drafted in the USFL college draft, and he signed during the offseason, so that's a huge add. Nick Gagemos is a guy that has had a lot of practice squads in the past couple of years, back since 2021 till 2023. Then you look at Derek Dees. He's also been in practice squads, but him only the past year and a half, 2 years, my bad. So overall, I think that this is a placement because Gunnar Oaks has a lot of potential. You drafted him in the college draft. He is a local guy, so naturally him being, on the team is a big deal since he did play at Eastern Michigan. But when you look at Hikutini, he is a legit starter. He is one of the best starters in the league, which I guess that shows the kind of lack of depth the tight end position has when he is the 4th best starter. No hate to him. It's just that compared to the running back group where Darius Victor is maybe the 4th best running back when he is insanely good, there's the drop off. But the Panthers are easily 4. He is the best starting tight end that isn't one of the big 3. They're at 4. Now, the first big 3 team to fall is the Showboats at 3. Look, Sage Surratt was incredible. I think there's a very real argument he was better than Sternberger, just because of the fact that he did have 50 receptions, which is one of the highest in the entire league. Over 550 yards is incredible. The only issue is he only had one TD. Now, when you look at their backups, J.J. Wilson was a really solid tight end for them the past season. 170 yards and 16 receptions. Then you have Wes Saxton Jr., who was one of the Generals' tight ends this past year. And then Michael Ezike, who was at UCLA for 4 years and looked okay. He should be great for blocking, all that. We'll see. The issue is I think that two teams above them, simply put, have a better backup. And that's really the issue. There are two teams that have a better backup than the Showboats. J.J. Wilson is great, but I think there's two guys that are better than him as backups. That's why I'm putting him at 3. And you got to be real, he is the one that didn't get an all-USFL, all-XFL nod. Even though I personally think he has an argument above Sternberger, just because I think that's Surratt was more of the, type of guy that's a solid, dependable guy versus the, really flashy Sternberger. But I'm going to put him at 3. I think that Sternberger and Latimer are arguably both better than him, and I think their backups are better too. Because number 2, the San Antonio Brahmas finally get high on one of these lists. Usually, or the last couple, they've been pretty low on him, and I think respectfully, or rightfully so, but this time they legitimately are high. Cody Latimer is the best tight end the XFL had by a country mile. There was no one even close to him. 593 yards, 4 TDs is incredible, 50 receptions is great. Then you look at Alize Mack. Not only is he like J.J. Wilson, he's returning to his team, but he was even better than J.J. Wilson. 28 receptions with 230 yards on a San Antonio team that wasn't really that great this past year. That's pretty respectable. The fact is that they only have 2 tight ends on their roster, and that's all they needed to. Look, I know it's the same thing like the Showboats in the running back video about how they only had 3 guys, but there were 3 guys were a legit number 1 running back, a guy that was kind of forced into it but played okay, and then a college guy. This is 2 tight ends that both have shown they can be a number 1 option. And the one that is going to be the number 1 option, Cody Latimer, since his quarterback is here as well, they're going to be really good. Great tight end group, easily number 2, but number 1 I'm putting as the Stallions. The Stallions only because they have 3 tight ends. I think Alize Mack is better than Marcus Baugh or Jordan Thomas. Sternberger and Latimer are kind of a wash. It's how do you want your tight end? Sternberger had 7 TDs, 517 yards, though he had 17 less receptions than Surratt, or Latimer had only 33. But then Marcus Baugh, one of the other tight ends Michigan had this past season, almost 200 yards. And then Jordan Thomas had almost 150 yards with St. Louis. Big loss for St. Louis losing him. So, yeah, I think they're number 1. Sternberger, Surratt, Latimer all kind of cancel each other out. Alize Mack is better than the backups that Memphis had. Having both Baugh and Thomas as backups, I think is better than having Alize Mack as a backup. Because that means that if they only carry 2 tight ends, so they cut one of these 2 guys, whoever stays showed that he is really that guy, whereas Alize Mack is going to get it just by being there as a tight end pretty much. So I'm putting the Stallions at number 1. So I'll do it for my list for the tight ends. This is one of the easier ones to do, considering the fact that you really only, you pretty much could divvy up the teams into like 3 different groups. The bottom couple, then like 5 and 6, 4, and then the top 3. Again, 5 and 6, it's hard for me to fully justify it. It's just that I have a feeling that Bowman isn't going to really work out as well with Houston as all the other tight ends that have shown a lot. It might be a bold take, but it's a take I'm going to ride with for now. So I'll do it for that one. As always, guys, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. Again, Q&A is next week. Power rankings video, the second one for the UFL, is going to come out probably Saturday or Sunday when training camp comes out, unless I want to do more of these position rankings before it. Hopefully I can get out 2, maybe 3 more position rankings by the end of the week, as I'm trying to use them to help do the power rankings video. We'll see. Going to try and do at least 1 defensive video and maybe 1 special teams video. Be on the lookout for all that, and as always, have a great night.